The Claiming of Grimmauld Place by bixgirl1, Chapter 5, Part 1, Commitments Rendered. When the door finally opened and closed, it was long past nightfall. Harry looked up from his place on the sofa, hearing nothing about the rustle of fabric come from the entryway, and lo, hesitant breathing. He looked back down at Frank, who had shifted at the noise, eyes blinking open from his drowse. Just for something to do, Harry took a few flowers from the pot on the sofa cushioned next to him and set them in front of Frank, who didn't move to eat them. A minute passed, then another. Finally, he heard the soft tread of Draco's shoes clip against the floorboard as he first went into the darkened kitchen, then headed toward the dining room. The house had seemed to realize how Harry was feeling upon his entry, because none of the lamps had come on when the night had begun to fall. Only a low fire had been lit. He'd sat on the new Chesterfield sofa he'd picked up from the exclusive catalogue Draco had given him, tan and white and homey, with round, tufted arms decorated with brass buttons, and waited, falling asleep once for a few minutes and only getting up to lose the loo. Frank, too, had seemed to understand that something was wrong. He hadn't moved from Harry's feet in the hours since Harry had come home.
"You're awake?"
Draco said stiffly from the archway of the parlour. Harry looked at him. He tilted his glass to drain the last drops of his drink.
"Yeah, I waited up for you. You can't have been working this whole time,"
he said pointedly. Draco edged into the room. The firelight caught the angles of his narrow face, with moving shadows. Sat down on the opposite end of the sofa, frowning.
"I was, as a matter of fact. You left the house at 8 this morning. It's after... What time is it?" 11.
Draco flicked his wand and summoned his own glass and a crystal decanter of whiskey from the highboard in the corner. He poured himself a drink, darting glances at Harry, then levitated the bottle back before taking a sip.
"I was at my second job."
"2 jobs," Harry said numbly as he processed it.
"There's nothing wrong with having a job,"
Draco said, jerking his chin up.
"Or 2. Or 3, which I did before I moved in here."
"What did you do?"
"Not what a lot of people in the war had to do,"
Draco said. His hands were shaking slightly. He took another swallow of his drink and wiped away a trickle of liquid that spilled from the corner of his mouth to his chin.
"I worked in the food service industry. Muggle, of course. Right after the war ended. No one was willing to hire someone with a dark mark, and..."
His lip squirked humorously.
"In a vintage clothing shop. Neither of those jobs lasted long because I was still learning about technology. But before Pansy's parents fled, I had some talks with their house elves about food preparation and service. So the next job I got was waitstaff at a restaurant."
He gave a negligent shrug.
"The pay was decent. It kept me off the streets. Pansy and Greg and I shared a flat, but it wasn't easy the first year."
Harry stared at him, mouth dry.
"Off the streets?"
Draco gave him an even look and crossed one leg over the other, settling back into the sofa cushions.
"They'd taken the manor. Where was I supposed to sleep?" "What about the parents, their properties in France?" Harry asked.
Draco smirked.
"My mother insisted that to follow my father would decrease my opportunities in life. She thought a clean break from him, at least publicly, would be best for me. She was right, of course. Anyhow, our estate in France is slowly closing them out. That's the funny thing about house magic. When you draw from the original property to charm subsequent homes, and the original property stops belonging to you..."
He shrugged again.
"They'll have another 2 or 3 years. Plenty of time if no one buys the manor before then. Something I'm doing my best to assure won't happen."
"How? And plenty of time for what?"
"For me to come into my vault,"
Draco explained, suddenly vicious. He gulped the rest of his drink in one go, eyes fierce and bright even in the dimness of the room.
"The ministry couldn't take that. Tenements not yet inherited were not subjects to fines, though they did try. I'll have enough to buy back the manor, enough to restore it for them, enough to..."
He broke off, staring broodingly into the fire for a moment before addressing Harry's other questions.
I have my ways. I could...
Harry looked away, throat working.
I could help make sure it doesn't get bored. I don't need your help,
Draco said, voice so tight at Harry's side.
Why keep it a secret, though?
Harry asked, feeling hurt and mistrust coil in behind his breastbone again.
And have you feel sorry for me?
Draco asked, cracking a sharp laugh.
You? Why should I have? I just needed a place to live after Pansy's landlord discovered Francis. You and I struck a bargain. I certainly didn't know that we'd be...
He faltered, avoiding Harry's eyes. Harry looked away, his jaw working. The resentment in Draco's tone, the way his eyes flashed. Harry wanted to yell that they weren't at Hogwarts anymore, and if he could get past their shared history, then Draco should bloody well be able to as well. After all, Harry had been the wronged party for most of their relationship, and all Draco had to do was... Harry swallowed, the bitterness rising in his throat like bile. Felt sick at the reminder of what they used to be to one another, and furious that Draco was bringing it up.
Right, but we are...
Harry said with a growl. His hands curled into fists, nails biting into his palms.
For a while now, and more, even before that. You've been keeping secrets from me for months, refusing me to tell me about where you went, making me think you were trying to keep your family business afloat. You lied. And you're shocked by that?
Draco burst out furiously.
Or just shocked that I work in the muggle world, that I serve people?
He said with a sneer.
That a Malfoy would ever. Believe me, I was shocked too. But when the ministry officials, upon searching for work, make it clear that you're only likely to make money on your knees, you learn exactly how far your pride extends and how to get over your ideas of what service really is. I wouldn't have thought you'd at least be glad I wasn't obliviating muggles and stealing their purses for Merlin's sake.
Harry blinked rapidly, anger muted by the implication. His voice was hoarse.
You didn't. You never had to. No.
Draco snorted. He rolled his eyes. But then the derisiveness in his face faded, and his voice took on a cautious note.
I thought about it. Pansy almost did. That was when I got my third job, answering telephones. It's not a bad thing, working,
Harry said with a sudden ache, echoing Draco's earlier statement.
I just don't understand why you'd lie. I could have helped. Maybe being seen together. That wasn't our deal, Potter,
Draco said. Lips passed and he dragged a hand through his hair.
You've done enough saving, especially of me. It was equitable, what we agreed to when I moved in. People would know that I lived here, that we let bygones be, and my reputation would perhaps begin to restore itself enough that I had a chance at the potions apprenticeship I want, and I would help you in return. I know you like to indulge in your hero complex, but I don't need it, he said. I don't want it. Everything else between us was incidental.
Harry scrubbed a tired hand over his face.
I'm not accusing you of whoring yourself out to me, he mumbled into his palm, or even using me. But I am using you, that's the point, we agreed to it, Draco said with heavy calm. Before I moved in, I could use you and you could use me, but I didn't want your help beyond that. Room and board and a chance for me to breathe and not worry about getting kicked out. A place where Francis would be safe, being able to have Pansy and my parents more. What are you doing now?
Harry asked, plucking a question out of the host of them crowding his brain.
Personal shopping. I also work,
Draco said with a faint, ironic smile.
At a t-shirt shop.
T-shirts. Harry nodded and looked down at his knees for a moment. He took a deep breath.
A patience apprenticeship. It's not just a hobby. Draco snorted. No, I won't spend nearly so much time on a hobby. I barely get enough sleep as it is. Less since we started checking.
He tilted his chin up again, as if daring Harry to challenge him.
I'm going to get my potions mastery. There's a master in Russia who said he'd be willing to take me on for the right price, especially if I manage to repair my reputation. Aren't apprenticeships supposed to be, I don't know, free?
Harry fumbled out.
You work for them and they teach you. Some of them even pay a wage.
He swallowed, thinking of Draco having to move to Russia to attain something he wanted. Thinking of Draco so far away at all. With a short, unfunny laugh, Draco gestured to his left forearm.
Only for some people. I've been sending him a portion of my wages for a year. What about Slughorn? The man who has done all he can to distance himself from the Slytherin house in the wake of the war?
Draco asked dryly, mouth tilting up in the corner. Harry wanted to kiss it, flush with startled affection at discovering this side of him, something he'd never once thought to expect, something that made such perfect sense. He felt a surge of shame at having never allowed himself to think about the whys of Draco's closely held secrets, and never having considered pride to be something someone could use to better themselves. He held himself still, fingers gripping his thighs, to keep himself from moving as Draco continued.
No, he turned me down, and quite soundly so. Borrowed an owl to mail me his refusal and asked me not to contact him again.
Harry scowled.
He's always been an arsehole. Well?
Draco nodded after a moment, jumped his fingers against his knees thoughtfully.
He's no Severus. Snape was an asshole too.
Harry said unthinkingly. Draco huffed, a soft laugh, and Harry chanced to glance at him. His shoulders had gone spiky from tension when he talked about working, but they were coming down now. Sighing, Harry let his hand stray to Draco's, covering his nervous fingers. Draco still, looking at him.
I wish you would have told me. I wish for a lot of things,
Draco muttered.
I'm not one of your pet projects. I don't have all that many projects,
Harry pointed out. He smiled wryly.
And just a gnome for pet.
Draco's hands flipped under Harry until they were palm to palm. His fingers curled around the back of Harry's hand, and Harry looked at the tapered length of them, thinking of how nimble Draco was when dicing potion ingredients. His hand was warm and dry against Harry's own, and this, holding hands, somehow felt 1,000 times more intimate than anything they'd done together so far.
It's an awful pet to have,
Draco said under his breath. But the gaze he flashed to Harry was warm.
Yeah, he is,
he admitted, scratching his jaw idly. He contemplated leaving the conversation there, but so much had already gone unsaid because he'd wanted to live in his comfortable bubble, because he hadn't pressed to.
That's why you have trouble finding the time to help me train the house or go shopping with me, fine. But when I invite you out because I actually want to go out with you, because we're...
He gestured vaguely, not sure how to finish the sentence. Not sure how Draco would finish the sentence.
And what are we?
Draco asked, with surprising directness.
Well, dating,
Harry said after a brief pause.
At least, I thought we were. I thought that's what we said. Going to my best friend's party isn't exactly the same as taking an ex-Death Eater out to dinner,
Draco said dryly.
I was just glad you'd stopped hiding it from your friends.
Exacerbated, Harry squeezed Draco's hand until he winced and glared.
I already said I was never hiding it. Is that why you wouldn't sleep with me? Not a secret, no matter the reason.
Draco hedged. He sniffed.
I found myself uncomfortable with the idea of starting an arrangement like that with you, knowing I'd be leaving. What then, you?
Stop being uncomfortable?
Harry asked, snorting. You asked me to Pansy's party, even knowing I may be gone. May have to travel back for it.
Draco said, looking down at their hands.
You didn't care that your friends knew, even though I'd be leaving. even though we can't be more than.
No, I didn't. Harry frowned.
What do you think? Hermione says we're already more.
Oh, does she? Draco said, sneering a bit. He hesitated, sneer fading into a frown.
I don't know that we can be. I'm here until 4, Harry. If I manage to get the spot, I think I will.
He paused, something unreadable in his face.
It's not that I don't.
He broke off, looking away. Harry could see Draco's pulse fluttering in his throat, the strain of pink spreading over his cheeks. Regret bloomed in Harry's chest. Sharp ache, swift and startling. He nodded and forced a smile, tired down to his bone from the dull disappointment flickering through him at the way Draco's face closed off against him, so different than the laughing softness they shared in bed. Harry took a deep breath. If it was going to end between them, it didn't have to end now.
I told her I didn't know either, but that you were pretty good at sucking my cock,
he made himself say against a clench of unpleasant reality. Draco gargled a burst of shocked laughter, gliding his eyes to gog Harry's face, looking relieved. He shook his head, lips curling up.
Pretty good.
With one quick movement, his hand slid out of Harry's and he twisted off the couch, settling on his knees between Harry's legs. Harry sucked in a sharp breath as Draco's hand popped open the button of his flies, then unzipped his jeans. He hooked his index finger in the waistband of Harry's boxers, sliding them from side to side, knuckles brushing lightly over Harry's skin and lowering his head and mouthing at the bulk of Harry's erection, sending a wicked glance upward when Harry groaned softly. He tugged gently on Harry's pants, and Harry obliged him, lifting his hips so Draco could pull him down with his jeans to his knees. He licked his lips, one hand circling Harry's prick, the other finding his balls to cup and scrape his fingertips against them.
I don't know if I should give you one, now that I know what you really think of them.
Draco murmured. Harry gasped in response, his hips bucking into Draco's loose fist as Draco glided his foreskin back to expose the head of his cock, even as it fattened to full hardness at Draco's touch.
No, you definitely should,
Harry said, staring down heatedly at him, voice uneven.
At least show me why I'm wrong.
Draco smirked, sly and smug. He flicked his tongue out and slit it over Harry's, licking away the moisture that had gathered there, then huffed a hot breath against it. Harry wriggled, hands digging into the couch cushion. He gave a nudge upward with his hips in silent entreaty.
The person who tries to explain why someone is wrong is a fool, Draco said.
He turned his head and bit at the soft skin of Harry's inner thigh. The hand cupping Harry's balls gave them a little tug, then a slow, thoughtful roll. Harry jerked, pleasure spiking through, as Draco continued to work him with a light, teasing touch.
I know, yeah,
Harry agreed fervently.
You give fantastic blowjobs. Amazing one. Best I've ever had. Is that so?
Draco smiled, and Harry thought he was in for a bout of prolonged torture, but then he added,
As long as you appreciate them,
and lowered his mouth in one smooth slide of hot and wet. Harry groaned, his hand falling to Draco's shoulder, his head falling to the back of the sofa. He rocked his hips up in time with Draco's bobbing head, little zings of heat travelling through him. But then Draco removed his mouth and murmured something under his breath. He released Harry's balls to slide his hand further down, fingers parting Harry's cheeks. Harry held his breath. He scooted forward on the sofa, nodding without looking up, and felt Draco's cool, lubricated fingers rub against him.
Oh, yeah,
he groaned out. So often lately he didn't even realize exactly what he was in the mood for until Draco started in on him.
That's all. Fuck.
Harry dug his fingers into the stretched fabric and Draco's shirt, twisting it in his grip.
Thought so,
Draco said, sounding smug again. Their hand on him grew tighter, squeezing gently and twisting when Draco stroked over the head, even as he pressured the tips of the fingers inside of Harry, who widened his thighs to accommodate him more fully. He braced himself, for them to go deep, but Draco kept them where they were, barely inside of Harry, twisting them slowly. It wasn't enough, and because of that, was too much all at once. He moved his hand over Harry with long, elegant strokes.
"Just look at you,"
he murmured.
"You're right,"
Harry said inanely, just for a reason to agree with him, with anything at this moment. His climax rose up in him, inexorable as the tide. Draco's fingers and gripping hand lighting all of his most sensitive nerve endings on fire.
"You're right. I'm going to come."
Draco hummed softly, finally pushed his fingers in another inch, then dragged them back out to the tips, spreading them wide.
"Sure, Harry,"
said softly.
"Where?"
Harry whined, pumping up into Draco's steady, gripping fist.
Your... My what? Face? Mouth?
Draco snickered, and Merlin, even that was hot. The way he got off on driving Harry mad. Harry nodded, his throat working hot.
"Yeah,"
he said, not really caring.
"You want me to pick, then?"
Draco tsked. He dragged his fist down to the base of Harry and gave a series of tiny clenches around it. Harry's head lolled to the side, his stomach and shoulders tightening. Then Draco lowered his mouth again, just as he thrust his fingers several times in succession, pressing directly against Harry's prostate. Harry mouthed loudly, his prick jumping and throbbing out his release into Draco's mouth. Felt Draco's throat move against the head, swallowing, even as he continued to finger Harry with the single-mindedness he seemed to apply to every aspect of his life. Harry sagged when the cresting pleasure ebbed, relaxing into the softness of the sofa, the world coming back to him in bits and pieces. He blinked when Draco drew off him, looked up when Draco removed his fingers. Draco levered himself up. He'd already undone his own trousers and stood in front of Harry, head tilted back as he looked down at him, glasses smudged. His eyes were focused on Harry's softening prick as he wanked himself in long, fast pulls. Swallowing hard, Harry forced himself out of his replete inertia long enough to kick his shoes, trousers, and pants all the way off. He scooted down even more, arse hanging off the edge of the sofa. "Come on," said Draco, flushing when Draco's hand paused on himself, and his pale brow knit in confusion before he tightened his fist and resumed.
"Just hold fucking still,"
Draco said, jaw bunching. His eyes were dark.
"I'm going to come on you."
Harry gave a feeble jerk and his heart fluttered. He felt in danger of swallowing it. He widened his thighs again. He took a deep breath.
"Draco, come on,"
said pointedly. Draco faltered completely and stared at him in disbelief.
"We haven't yet,"
he said breathlessly. But even as the words left his mouth, he was lowering to his knees again, upright this time. Cast another look at Harry's face as if to check for the veracity of the invitation. Draco lowered Harry's leg from his shoulder and draped himself over Harry's chest when it was over, still shuddering lightly and mouthing toothless kisses against Harry's collarbone and throat, then lifting his head to kiss Harry's mouth with a smile of such open pleasure that all of the simple, unthinking joy Harry had felt only moments prior became sharp-edged with renewed fear. He kissed Draco back, trying to temper the sudden anticipation of loss he felt. Neither of them had made any promises going into this. He knew that. He did. Draco gave a low, rich laugh, pulling away from Harry with a small nip to his upper lip. Pried himself up, giving a warm, wicked glance to Harry's cock, lying half-hard against his groin and peeking out from under his palm.
"Can you again?"
Harry licked his lips.
"If you give me a minute,"
he said, heart pounding desperately. He made himself smile.
"And maybe a shower."
Easing out of him with a small grimace, Draco nodded. Landed Harry a look as he stood, grabbing his wand from the sofa, and cast a cursory cleaning charm over the both of them, then pulling up his trousers so they sagged open at his hips. He held out his hand, and Harry let himself be pulled up. He winced at a twinge in his arse. Forgotten that part of bottoming. His gaze caught on Frank, staring up at them unblinkingly, and he frowned.
"Frank got an eyeful," He snorted. "Good thing he's not magical, or I'd be more embarrassed." "Francis," Draco said. "And he's obviously just more gentlemanly than the gnome. He's magical enough to know he ought to close his eyes, aren't you, Francis?"
Frank stared up at him, jaw working as slow as a treacle. He finally started eating the flowers Harry'd left on the floor. Harry chuckled.
"I believe I was promised a shower," Harry said,
abandoning Frank's placid gaze for Draco's heated one.
"Yes, and I can think of a few things we can do while the water warms,"
Draco said suggestively, ducking his head to scrape his teeth over Harry's jaw. Harry shivered, inhaling against Draco's throat. That spicy, strange combination of smoky potions and mint. Thought about a time, distant but in the foreseeable future, when he wouldn't be able to smell that again. Unable to help himself, he sifted a hand through Draco's sweaty, pale hair. It felt like silk between his fingers. Draco arched an eyebrow at him, curious and amused, and tugged on Harry's hand. Harry nodded and let himself be led. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this part of The Claiming of Grimmauld Place. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.